In the least surprising news of the week, Daniel Dubois is suing Don King. He alleges that King hasn't paid his purse in full for his fight against Trevor Bryan. Now, I watched Chris Andre's video where he mentioned this situation, and he said that there was somebody, I'm not sure if it was a journalist or what, but somebody was claiming that the reason Don King, I guess privately, has given for allegedly not paying Dubois his full purse is that Dubois' promoter, Frank Warren, still owes Don King money. Well, as Chris Andre said, what has that got to do with Daniel Dubois? If you've got an issue with Frank Warren, that's a separate issue with a separate person. That's got nothing to do with Daniel Dubois. Why are you punishing Daniel Dubois for something that you claim his promoter did? You know? That's two different people and two separate issues. But really and truly, none of us are surprised because in the run up to the Dubois Trevor Bryan fight, even IFL were asking Daniel Dubois and his team, I think they even asked Frank Warren, whether they were concerned about not being paid in full, given Don King's reputation, which goes back many decades, for not necessarily being the easiest individual to deal with or the most scrupulous individual, okay, to put it mildly. Now, I think it was a two-part video many years ago called Psychopaths in Boxing. And in those videos, I said that in my view, based upon the research I've done, the books I've read, personal experiences, learning psychology in the education system and so on, that Don King is a psychopath. And many people to this day still message me about those videos. Oh, you should do more videos like that, Psychopaths in Boxing. They're really interested in psychology, but specifically psychopathology or psychopathy. People are fascinated by this. Well, if you want to hear me talk more about psychology and psychopathology specifically, then you might want to consider signing up for my Patreon because I've done loads of episodes where I talk about psychopaths on there. But on the YouTube here on the boxing channel, yeah, I occasionally touch on it, but I'm not going to make it the main focus of the channel or the main focus of my videos. And if through an organic process I end up making more videos about psychopaths in boxing, then that will happen, but it's not something that I'm planning at this stage. But if you're interested in learning more about psychopathy and studying psychopathology, then a good place to start would be a book which was released in the 1990s, published in the 90s, by a guy called Dr. Robert Hare. And it was really a seminal work at the time, and it still stands up very well today, because prior to Robert Hare releasing that book, most of the research into psychopathy was focused on criminal psychopaths. And the thing that Robert Hare did in his book and in his research was to shift the focus, not just from criminal psychopaths, but also to non-criminal and non-violent psychopaths. Psychopaths in the workplace, psychopaths in the corporate world, psychopaths in politics and the media and so on. So it was groundbreaking for that reason. And Robert Hare, through his research and what have you, being at the cutting edge of that particular field, was the person who invented the test, the clinical test, which they still use today to diagnose psychopathy. It's called the Hare test, right? Named after Dr. Robert Hare. And Hare is spelled Hare. The book is called Without Conscience, right? So if you want to get started, a good place to go would be the book by Dr. Robert Hare, Without Conscience. And that's all about psychopaths. So yeah, that's what I'll say about that. And to talk briefly about psychopaths and Don King, who I believe is one, the core component that determines whether somebody is a psychopath is a lack of conscience, the inability to empathize with anybody. the inability to form normal emotions such as guilt and remorse. With a psychopath, these are completely absent. When they have done studies on the uh, the brains of psychopaths, they found that when you hook a psychopath up to the equipment that monitors the electrical activity in the brain, they find that the brains of psychopaths work very different to the brains of normal people. So it's far deeper than a lot of people realize in terms of how different they are. Psychopaths are born, they're not made. This is something that a lot of people struggle with. They think that all bad people in the world are simply individuals who had rough upbringings, or they became bad because of environmental factors and so on. Well, there is loads of clinical psychologists who specialize in the study of psychopathology, psychopathy, and they will tell you that in their research and in their experience, that's just not the case. Of course, there are people who develop certain psychopathic traits because of childhood traumas and environmental factors, yes. And these people are referred to by some as proto-psychopaths. I mean, most people, most of you guys could exhibit psychopathic traits in certain scenarios, in certain situations, if they're extreme enough. But a psychopath is psychopathic all the time. There's no off switch. Okay, it doesn't matter what environment they're in. It doesn't matter, any of that stuff. They will never have a conscience. They're incapable of feeling remorse and guilt and all this type of stuff. It's just completely absent from a psychopath. So, yeah, they're born, they're not made. I'm absolutely convinced of that, not only from the research I've done, but from my own personal experiences. They're just born that way. And it's very controversial because then you're looking at the prospect of psychopathic children, right? Which is a very controversial thing, because if you then diagnose, and I believe it's not permitted legally to actually diagnose a child as a psychopath, if you were to do that, then you're basically condemning the child. Do you know what I mean? This is why it's so controversial. And there is actually a documentary that I watched on YouTube several years ago about psychopaths. It's a very good documentary. Dr. Robert Hare is in it. There's a bunch of British forensic psychologists who are in it as well. And again, they seem to be, the majority of them, in agreement that indeed, psychopaths are born, they're not made, as in a pure psychopath. Because I say there are lots of proto-psychopaths in society, people who, in certain situations, in certain scenarios, can become psychopathic, but they can also drift away from psychopathic behavior and show compassion and remorse and so on in different environments. Now, psychopaths, of course, are experts at mimicking human emotions, because a psychopath doesn't have normal emotions. So through their lives, through childhood, and certainly in their teenage years, they study the emotional reactions of normal people and they try to copy it, And if you want to see a film, for example, of a psychopath in the workplace, I recommend watching Nightcrawler, which is starring Jake Gyllenhaal. And that's about a psychopath in the media. And the media, for sure, is absolutely awash with psychopaths. There is a much higher proportion of psychopaths in the media, the mainstream media, than there is in the general population. So, psychopaths gravitate towards certain industries, and I'm talking about the non-criminal ones. The criminal world, of course, is full of psychopaths, right? They say that around in the UK, somewhere in the region of 25% of the prison population in Britain is psychopathic. But in fact, is it 25% or 15%? It might be 15%. It's either 25 or 15. But in the general population, they say it's maybe 1 to 2% is psychopathic. In the media, I don't want to hazard a guess in terms of the percentage, but it's higher than the general population for sure, in terms of psychopaths in the media. Plenty of them in there. Of course, in politics, in the corporate world, there's a disproportionately high number of psychopaths at the upper echelons of the corporate world. So again, Robert Hare talks about a lot of this in his book, Without Conscience. Anyway, let me stop there about psychopaths. Again, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I recommend that book. And if you want to hear me talk more about it, sign up for the Patreon. There are several episodes in there where I talk about psychology, psychopathology, and so on. Anyway, for now, Daniel Dubois suing Don King for not being paid in full for the Trevor Bryan fight. I hope he gets his money. You can't really say that this hurts Don King's reputation because this is his reputation. So it just upholds his reputation, right? Does it hurt Frank Warren's reputation? I mean, Frank Warren was business partners with Don King for a long time. And I always say that birds of a feather flock together. This guy was real close to Don King and learned a lot from Don King by his own admission. I don't think he's as bad as King, but I don't think he's too far off, to be honest with you, in terms of scruples or lack thereof. And this is several £100,000 we're talking about here, or several $100,000 that Daniel Dubois alleges he hasn't been paid. Can't Frank Warren just cover that? You know, Frank Warren is a multimillionaire. Can't he cover Daniel Dubois' purse and then sort the situation with Don King out himself? You know, would Eddie Hearn, for example, not do that? Would he not cover his fighter's purse if somebody else hadn't paid him? I mean, maybe he wouldn't, but I'm just throwing that question out there. I think that if it was like $10 million, $20 million, then I wouldn't be expecting Frank Warren to cover it. But if it's a few $100,000, you know, I think the right thing to do would be to cover it and then sort the situation out with Don King. And if Don King feels aggrieved and that Frank Warren owes him money, because Don King actually won a court case against Frank Warren years back, and I'm assuming it's got something to do with that, Don King should just be suing Frank Warren again. You know what I mean? Why take it out on Dubois? Anyway, and maybe perhaps that's just an excuse. You know, who knows? Maybe Don King never had any intention, irrespective of his situation with Frank Warren. Maybe he never had any intention of paying Dubois in full. You know, that's potentially a possibility. Whatever the case may be, let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high-quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, is decentralized, and it's 100% censorship-free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.